folks. Nice to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Um, some of you are joining us via Zoom, others are joining us live on Facebook. My name is Dimitrios Triantaphyllou from the Center for International European Studies at Kadir Has University in Istanbul. And this is the third of our series of webinars on social consciousness unchained. And before I introduce you to the panelists, I should say this is an initiative that emerged during the lockdown. You know, as I was sitting at home and then talking to my friend Serdar about what this means for us as individuals, because there is an existentialist dimension to COVID and everything, and how this has an impact on society. I realized that I don't know if I should admit it, but for the first time in my life, I actually contributed to causes. You know, a cause in Greece and a cause in Turkey, right? The Red Crescent in Turkey and a cause in Greece. And I gave some money because I felt the need to do this. I had never really done this, which was interesting for me. So I said, okay, well, maybe there is something about social consciousness. And I was just thinking about how all of this has an impact on us and our work. And in this sense, this is the third of our series of the Social Consciousness Unchained. We had done a first one that had to do with corporate social responsibility and its impact. And it was very interesting. We had Serdar Dinlo, who's our speaker here as well, since he's the head of CSR Turkey, and a colleague from CSR Athens, Greece, Elas, and from CSR Ukraine. And it was very interesting talking to the three of them about how they felt that also business is going through some sort of change, or they would wish it to go. So it's not, and therefore how this has an impact. So terms like human and others started appearing. Our second discussion had to do with the intersection between politics and civil society, because you know, you hear a lot about this right now as economies are trying to rebound. Some people take it ideologically and say, well, this is, you know, it's social democracy coming back, and others are very pragmatic about it. For example, in Greece, it's a center-right government. The prime minister there said, human life comes first. And now as we try to get the economy going, well, pragmatism says we cannot adopt liberal policies. We have to adopt other policies as well, which is more social, and we'll see what happens. But it's interesting, this debate. And this is happening in many countries. And here, in this third event, the idea is to talk about, you're all representatives of civil society organizations, and you've been very active and you do lots of work in the sectors you work with currently and other sectors you've worked with in the past, is how civil society organizations, the NGO sector itself, has been affected and how it's trying to contribute to the challenges. So we'll get to this in a second. Before I introduce you all, I would like, well, Serdar to say a couple of words, since he is also, as president of CSR Turkey, who is a partner on this venture, to basically give a half a second introduction. So Serdar, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really a great honor to host very distinguished two guests from two different countries and Turkey together. We are three. CSR Turkey works with the business world, and we are trying to help the business world to be more responsible during their operations and try to implement the new trends coming for the business world to be more compatible and successful in their own country market or in international market. And both CSR Turkey and CIES, we both believe in Sustainable Development Goals number 17, partnership. So that's why we are always in partnership. I mean, I'm bringing the business side a little bit in, plus the civil society, and we now have the academy inside. So with three stakeholders, we almost cover the 60% of the total stakeholders. So that's what we believe. So that's why we are doing this live events. So I again want to thank you very much for being with us today with this event, and hand over the stage to Dimitri again.
Well, thank you, Serdar. Let's turn a little bit. Let me introduce you all to our speakers. First, Cristina Rigman, who is Secretary General of Child Pact, which is the regional coalition for child protection. And I think you will tell us a little bit about it as we speak. But Cristina is an independent strategist, speaker, and trainer, providing training and consultancy of strategic planning, organizational development, monitoring and evaluation, and a number of other things: good governance, volunteer management, networking, and leadership. She's had over 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector. All of us started working at the age of 10, so 20 years is nothing. You know, we are all in our 30s. Over 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector in various leadership positions. And in the last 6, she's very active as a trainer, a facilitator, and a consultant for CSOs in the EU, Western Balkans, Caucasus, and Asia. She is a political science graduate with a focus on research methods, and has had research fellowships and scholarships at the Johns Hopkins Center for Civil Society Studies and the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars in the US. The Woodrow Wilson Center is about to change its name, but anyway. She's a certified trainer on Maxwell Disc behavioral analysis and studies the Maxwell method of leadership, speaking, and coaching. And as I said, she's currently the Secretary General of Child Pact, the Regional Coalition for Child Protection, which is a regional network of national networks of child-focused NGOs, about 600 NGOs covering about 11 countries in the Black Sea area and the Western Balkans. Also with us is Aspasia Kakari, who is currently the head of communications, policy, and campaigns at ActionAid Hellas. Aspasia is a communications expert with also over 20 years experience in the civil society sector. She has a master's degree in mass media and communication and an MA in international cooperation for sustainable development. And she has served in a number of different development and humanitarian NGOs in Greece and in Italy, in a variety of positions, such as a communications expert, a project manager, and a general manager. And she has worked in a number of countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, Moldova, Sri Lanka, Uzbekistan, and so on. And currently she's at ActionAid Hellas, which is one of the 46, I think, countries where ActionAid has offices. And Serdar Dindar, the president of Corporate Social Responsibility Association of Turkey, before he founded the CSR Turkey, he had worked for 23 years at the British Council and has been involved in founding over 32 different NGOs in Turkey proper. And therefore he's one of Turkey's experts and activists on NGOs. Actually, Serdar and I met when he was the director of the Lifelong Center, Learning Center at Kadir Has University for a long time. Where he developed a number of education programs in line with the needs of the public and identifying solutions to these challenges. And since then, he moved on. He became operations manager at the International Medical Corps, working with thousands of refugees in Turkey. In all that time, he's also been active at CSR Turkey and as well at CSR Europe, with which CSR Turkey is affiliated, where he spent 3 years as a board member of CSR Europe. And currently he's a senior advisor at the International Consulting Expertise in Ankara. So this is in brief information about our speakers. And to start, I've asked them, we'll have a couple of rounds and then we'll look to also take your questions. And the idea is, okay, let me find the questions I asked. I'm asking very general questions here. Of course, now I cannot find them because my phone, okay, all right. And so, I mean, the basic idea and theme is, you know, are we living through a defining moment in world history? I think this is something of our concern right now. And, you know, we talk about it at state level, countries talk about it, and in terms of their foreign policy and foreign policy experts and so on. But it's not just country level, it's also at the human level, the individual level, the non-sector level, and so on. And this is a question that has arisen. And therefore, how do CSOs, how do civil society organizations work in this environment, and how do they address today's challenges, which is a basic theme of today's webinar. And I would like to ask our speakers in terms of the first round. I mean, I send them very general and many questions where they can pick and choose. So given your experiences in your respective experiences in the CSO sector, what are the key challenges of the sector today? Its benefits, what is the impact of the sector in moving forward the causes of your respective organizations, the causes that your organizations promote? Has your work been affected by the pandemic? Even though in the second round, we'll talk more about also the pandemic in that sense. Has it made it more difficult, more complex? Before we came on, Cristina was telling me that she's had to learn to do trainings online, which is a novel thing. I mean, others do it, but we've had to adapt, right? Talking to each other through a screen. And therefore, you can think of the consequences on all of our jobs. And especially, for example, in terms of advocacy and communicating the issues you addressed, how has all of this been affected? So maybe I'll start with the way I introduce you. Maybe Cristina, you want to go first, 5 or 6 minutes, and then have the others. And looking forward to hearing you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you also for the invitation and for the challenging questions that you're posing. I would start by saying yes to your main question. I do think that we are living a defining moment. And I can only hope that all of us, from the individual level to the states and highest decision makers in this world, in whichever position they are, we are actually learning something out of this. Because I think for the first time in many, many years, we could see ourselves vulnerable in similar ways. There were many crises in other parts of the world, but we were quite safe in our European cocoon, to say, and now here it is in danger. So I would say that in terms of how we were affected, the first thing I could notice, and I have experienced it myself, was the individual distress. You didn't know what to believe. You didn't know what to do. You didn't know what is true from everything that you can hear. You didn't know how you're gonna live, how you're gonna work, how you're gonna pay your bills. I mean, there was a level of individual distress on all the aspects of your life. You know, schools were closed, your children were at home, you had to work. I mean, everything was really, really disturbing at the individual level. And I guess we've all experienced this in various ways, regardless of how flexible we used to be with our work, how open we are, and how exposed to different experiences we have been before. This has been really, really challenging. I mean, I still have a very hard time thinking that I haven't been traveling in the past 5 months. And this is really, that's never happened in 7 years. I've stayed at home when my son was 1 year old, but then I came back to my old way of living and traveling and interacting with people. So I have been very, very challenged on this. But it's not about me. I'm sharing this from a personal view because I know there are many people who have found themselves in the same kind of experience. Moving on to the field that I work in. I work in the civil society for quite a long time. And in Child Pact, that's which is my current long-term engagement with an organization, we work with networks of child-focused NGOs in 11 countries in the Western Balkans and around the Black Sea. We're actually missing Greece, so we might talk about this, but we do have Turkey on board, which is good. So talking to our members in Child Pact, we were discussing about how severely their activity is affected because working in children's rights and child protection, many of our members and the members of our members were relying heavily on face-to-face interaction, on direct services, on visiting families, on meeting people and children and bringing them in common spaces. Everything was challenged. And unfortunately, I could also say all of these direct services have been stopped for at least a while. And this is really disturbing for an NGO who has a mission to protect children and to provide services, because you're really challenged in the core values and your reason of being. And then you ask yourself, how can I continue to exist and how can I continue to pursue my mission? Of course, there are remote ways of doing this, but it's still, when it comes to beneficiaries and direct service and interaction, this has been significantly challenged. And although organizations have tried very hard to compensate with the online services, it's very difficult, especially at particular ages of children, to provide meaningful support and counseling for like 3, 4, 5-year-olds in the online environment. So definitely CSO's activity has been significantly challenged. Another level of challenge that I can easily identify is the change in the way we work. Of course, it's not the first time that we experience remote working, especially in the CSO field, where we are more flexible and do not really have the requirements of other sectors. You're not necessarily the 9-to-5 type of working, stay in the office and travel just whenever it's needed. So we are used with the flexibility, but still it has been very difficult to do this because you have to and not because you choose to. So this is again another level of individual distress, which was added on also it's a management challenge. I have spoken, and you were talking about the online trainings. I've just finished this morning a 4-day module of training for civil society leaders in the countries around the Black Sea. This is associated with the Black Sea NGO Forum, where we have actually met, and we are talking to them, and we're seeing that everything is challenged in the way you manage the organization. Cash flows are challenged, because you know, financial difficulties are not new for CSOs, but financial difficulties in times of crisis are also new for CSOs, because they are adding an additional layer of stress, especially with the less flexible donors. And I'm coming slowly, I'm not sure about my 5 minutes, but I'm coming slowly to the end of the question that you were posing about how do CSOs work in this environment and how do they address the challenges. I would very much like to see an open discussion with more stakeholders, because it's not about how CSOs are doing this. Those people who do not get the services from CSOs will knock on the public institution's door to get the services they need. So it's not about how we as CSOs respond to this challenge. It's about how we, all the actors with the power of decision making and with the responsibility assumed or given to us to care for the people, are dealing with the current situation. And I really hope that we will see a lot of dialogue in between CSOs, public institutions, state authorities of whatever level, international organizations. Everyone should take this opportunity to sit around the Zoom, if we can't sit around the table, and discuss about how we can together address these challenges. One more comment I want to make, that in the field of children's rights and child protection, we have noticed that the crisis has actually unveiled all the system thoughts that we were aware of, but we were postponing. We were putting somewhere behind. Everything has been revealed. All the faults, all the shortcomings of our systems have been exposed greatly. And I truly hope, again, as my initial message was, that we will learn something out of this, because postponing to solve the problem doesn't mean that it's not there. It's there, and these problems have been there before the crisis, and they will go through the crisis and remain there. So the issue is not only how we deal with the crisis, but how we deal with everything that is not right in the way the systems are organized and in the way the people are served.
Very good. Very, very interesting points. I mean, some of these things I have not thought of, but I can see, and also how much you're paying for your organization and the work you do. And it's very interesting how already vulnerable groups, in particular here, children that you're trying to protect, are because of what's happening.
Yes.
So again, same sort of questions to Aspasia. You need to unmute yourself, Aspasia. And okay.
Well, then I will have to repeat that I'm really thankful for this invitation and the interesting discussion we are having already. Of course, I won't say anything different. For us, it has been also challenging. We are one of the first maybe organizations in Greece to start working from home on the 13th of March. And our community center in Athens almost like very rapidly transformed its services to the vulnerable populations into digital service providing, like more than 500 people received psychosocial support online, or they got to speak with an accountant or a legal advisor for their needs. And this was okay, but ActionAid is an international organization working in more than 45 countries. Maybe now we are working this year in 46 countries around the world. And unfortunately, this pandemic has shown that has intensified inequalities around the world, which means that maybe for us, working from home has been possible, or social distancing has been possible, but this is not possible if you live in a country in Africa where working from home means that you actually starve to death because you cannot really get the money to survive. And if you live in the 1 million refugee Rohingya camp in Bangladesh, then you cannot do any social distancing. You cannot practice social distancing. So for us, as an organization working with the most vulnerable to free the world from poverty and injustice, it has been really challenging, and we are trying to figure out what are the challenges that we have to face in order to move on to this new era, because the world is the end of the world as we know it. We're not going to get back, and maybe we don't want to get back to where we were. And I hope we're not going to get back to where we were. But unfortunately, it seems that we haven't learned much from the recent crisis, like the 2008 crisis. What showed us is that the richest of the world managed to become richer following the crisis. We saw government supporting banks and not the people in need. And actually, we followed IMF's advices to cut on education and health. So I think now we have an opportunity, which is a unique opportunity to reset and to fight for a fairer and greener world. Actually, climate change is making things much different. For us, climate change is a major risk because it might destroy everything that we managed to achieve in the organization's almost half-century history. Because, you know, climate changing is affecting more women, young people, and vulnerable people. And people may be living in the south. So for us, the global warming is already here. Maybe last May was the hottest month in the history, even recorded, and everything says that in 2020, it might be the hottest year. So I think these people that are getting affected are the ones with whom we should design the future, because actually we are experiencing that, you know, traditionally NGOs and development NGOs I will speak about, they divide the world into the rich north and the poor south. And I think that this division has to change. We need a paradigm shift, a new shift, because unfortunately, this pandemic has shown us that there are rich parts of the world that are being also affected. For example, in New York City, we see the effects of the pandemic, but also, you know, New York City is a city where most billionaires live, but at the same time, in the last 5 years, almost 50% of the population at once experienced poverty in New York City, which means that there is a south in every north country, there is a global south. So actually now we can't really say what we used to say, think global, act local. We have to act both local and global. I don't know if the 5 minutes passed or if I'm too...
You're okay. You can say a couple more things if you want. It's okay. I mean...
Okay, I will then share another experience that I had during this pandemic. Our volunteers were eager to go out and help. And since we didn't have the experience and we were afraid, you know, the first weeks of the pandemic, we didn't know if it was safe for our people to be out there. So what we thought was to create a platform, an online platform, linking all the different initiatives happening in Greece. And we created an interactive map where each citizen could put an initiative. And this, as Serdar said before, used to join grassroots organizations initiatives and volunteer groups, but also institutional initiatives and also corporate initiatives and state, you know, all the different stakeholders were there. And I think that's the only way we can move on. This pandemic really proved that our lives are connected more than ever before. In ActionAid, you know, in ActionAid Greece, for the last 20 years, we have been working in schools, trying to educate students to speak about these inequalities, these global inequalities. And this pandemic managed in a very short time to convince everyone that our lives are interconnected and that we cannot ignore what is happening next to us. While we were trying for years to find a way to get them to understand this. And also we understood something else, that we only have each other. And this is, I think, very important because unfortunately we see young people being really inactive and indifferent, and even older citizens. We don't really care, we don't really question the decision making nowadays because it has become very complicated. For example, we never question how budgeting is happening, like at municipal level or at state level, where there is something that we should know about. It's something that we should care about because it influences our everyday lives. So what we are trying to do is to kind of create a culture of active citizenship and make people understand that they only themselves can do something about their lives and about their future, and we have to fight all together for a change.
Well, thank you. This is all very interesting. And I was thinking about, you said at some stage that the world is changing and we should not go back. And I posted yesterday, I think it was, a little video from UNESCO, which is about this. It's about what we always keep saying to ourselves, oh, I wish I want to go back to normal lives. And that little video, which is 2 minutes, one can find on my wall, but look for it even on YouTube, UNESCO campaign, The Next Normal. And it's so interesting, the examples. I think, Cristina, you saw it, right? The examples that it has, what the normal is, which is the destruction of our planet. And so the new normal might actually be something. What is the next normal? And going back to our old lives might not be valid anymore. And I totally agree with you that this is maybe an opportunity. And also the issue that you raised, we'll also talk about the second round, but I mean, the pandemic has shown how susceptible we all are, especially given the fact that more and more of us are living in large urban settlements. You talked about a mega city like New York. I live in a mega city like Istanbul. We all live on top of each other. It's a microcosm. And so the divisions in rich and poor, they are there, but how they impact on issues such as climate change and global warming and so on is the same for everybody. So it's very interesting, some of these points. Serdar, since you already spoke at the beginning, you have only 2 minutes, but go ahead.
I don't know if I can manage in 2 minutes, but well, yes, civil society organizations are always facing a number of challenges. But with this COVID-19 showed us the challenges of the civil society organizations very clearly. And actually, we are sorry to see that civil society organizations are not as strong as we were thinking. Well, as I said, among many other challenges, the most important 2 challenges for civil society organizations are unstable funding, and exclusion from the national processes. And still yet, civil society organizations are still stepping into addresses to the challenges that COVID-19 is posing to their work and survival. They are still trying to lead community responses and amplifying the voice of the vulnerable populations with a little or even no outside support. So civil society are still demonstrating that there cannot be an effective result without their involvement in these during these crises. So civil society organizations confronted with a dual challenge to keeping their organizations afloat while also responding to the needs of the communities which they operate. And it looks like that they were not prepared to cope with the disruption caused by the pandemic. Because any crisis, the first budget or the first program that they cut by the organizations are in the sectors are the projects and the works that they do with civil society organizations. For example, private sector, when there is a crisis, they first call their corporate governance directors and say, stop the CSR or stop the works with the civil society organizations. And I don't understand why, but during the crisis times, although they can work with civil society organizations, private sector prefers doing direct donations. This is a new fashion maybe, and takes the civil society out of the pictures. And this is how the civil society acts, private sector acts actually. What about donors? I mean, donors, currently the donors postponed all the project calls for a future time, which nobody knows how long it is. I mean, last 6 months, we are waiting the results for the project proposals we submitted to donors, but no news. And now the donors are open new budget lines. Thanks God, it's good. But the subjects are directly related with COVID-19. And most of the civil society organizations don't have an experience or knowledge on this area, on the health sector. So there will be there will not be a fair competition among civil society organizations using these new budget lines opened by the donors. In government, currently governments are giving support to private sector in tons of different ways at all levels, starting from micro, small, medium enterprises, ending up with big multinational companies. But when it comes to civil society organization, there is nothing planned for them. Businesses are eligible to go for a bank credit, but civil society, they can't. Governments postponed all the taxes and other payments for the private sector and contributed to salaries for the private sector staff and many others, but there is nothing for civil society or their staff. And all the events, maybe if you consider, if you think carefully, most of the events around the world, very big ones in any size, are done by civil society organizations. For example, if I need to give an example, for example, World Public Health Summit, very big, 12,000 people participating, but organized by public health associations around the world from the different ones. World Tourism Summit, organized by tourism associations. So organizing events are the most important work for the civil society organizations. But now governments nowadays don't let any civil society organizations to their events. Even their annual meetings, even board meetings we can't do. Even if you do an online board meeting, it is not officially, it doesn't have an official validity. So since March, we cannot give any board decision. We cannot accept any new member. We cannot apply for a new project call. And because, and we cannot separate with any of our staff. That's also not allowed. And we cannot employ new staff. And in the meantime, we don't have a budget. We don't have any income. Well, if we look realistically, COVID-19 started most of the, with the COVID-19, most of the civil society organizations are in kind of semi-closed, I can say. Media is broadcasting about this COVID problems and always broadcasting about the problems with the private sector and other sectors. But there is no news about civil society, what problems we have. And I did observe lots of television programs and experts talking about how can they help people in social issues after pandemic, what can be done, but no one representing civil society there. And all the commentators are from unrelated sectors. Academia, I did read number of academic articles, but the effects about the pandemic, but I didn't read anything about civil society and these issues. Thank you, Dimitri. You are, moderating the first one, I can say. Well, when it needs, everybody names civil society as a third sector, but in the reality, it looks like nobody cares about it. Civil society, I think, is like a stepchild for other sectors, I can say, until now, if I completed my 5 minutes, Dimitri.
Okay. Well, Serdar, you've laid it out, a long list of complaints, which is the reality. And I think both Cristina and Aspasia alluded to many of these things as well. But you've taken it even further. I mean, you're right, board decisions, you have to sign them, right? They have to be certified. You have obligations towards the state as you're registered as an NGO, whatever. How do you do all these things? And the programs, we all know about this. We've even applied for projects together and everything is being delayed. And you're right, COVID-19 is the new world and we have to deal with that reality. So let's move on to the second round. And by the way, to those on Zoom, you can ask questions in the Q&A section if you want, and then I'll try to get the speakers to look at them. On Facebook, ask questions on the comment section of the CIS's live webcast. Now, the second round, we've already alluded a little bit. You've already touched upon some of the issues, right? The idea was to talk about, has the pandemic led, I mean, you talked about how it has impacted your organizations, but, and Aspasia, as I mentioned before, was talking about maybe this opportunity for a new world, so we have to define this. And I told you that the idea behind this initiative was that we thought that maybe a new social consciousness unchained. And so has the pandemic led to the emergence of a new social consciousness? And if it has, how does this contribute to furthering your work and your sector? What is the role for civil society and the emergence of a new social consciousness, given, again, the existentialist nature of the pandemic, just as much as what Aspasia talked about climate change, another existential issue anyway. So we're talking about existential natures, and maybe the pandemic has hit home that we're very vulnerable, all of us, in that sense. Or demands for greater civic engagement. Does the current context provide further impetus for the implementation of the SDGs? As the UN Secretary General that I keep following keeps saying, this is it, the opportunity to use that framework and promote it even more. And therefore, and also one of you, I think Aspasia again talked about youth, and it's true. We apply to projects in my center, and we've been looking at the levels of youth engagement in our part of the world. It's so low. It's low in general. But if you take Turkey, you take Greece, you take Romania, you take Bulgaria, I mean, it's really small, the engagement. So has the environment awakened youth as well, given the fact that they're among the most vulnerable groups, together with women, together with the poor segments of population and so on, right? So this is a way of thinking, what can we do? Apart from the fact that we talked about, intersectoral dialogue, a frame with stakeholders, as Cristina said, right? And the stakeholders are many, and Serdar alluded to many of the stakeholders, which is what SDG 17 is about. So, Cristina, you again, unmute first.
Me again, yes. Going to your question, so I can't say this time a definite yes. I would say about whether the pandemic has led to emergence of a new social consciousness. I can't say yes. What I can say is that it has provided us the opportunity to build a new social consciousness. And the task is now on each and every one of us to make this happen. We might lose this chance, or we might use it and make the best out of it. So I would say that on an individual level, it's really an opportunity to rethink everything from how you live your life, what impact you have as an individual on the environment and on the people who you interact with on a daily basis. Because each of us, there is research who says that no matter how introvert we are, each of us influences at least 10,000 people in their life. So for those who are more extrovert and working in people environments, definitely this number is really, really higher. So each of us has a power to influence over others. And it's going to be an individual decision in which way we want to influence the people that we interact with. And I truly hope it's going to be in the direction of a new social consciousness, which is caring for the people, caring for the planet, you know, putting the right things first, and the selfish interests a little bit behind, because there is space and for everything in this world. If we only take the, you know, if we measure things, if we don't do too much out of anything, but we just balance whatever we want to achieve in our lives as individuals and in our work. I want to comment a little bit on this new social consciousness and a few thoughts on how I see this happening, because I think it is very important that we take this opportunity to analyze our values as individuals, as organizations, as societies. If I look around and think, you know, if you look in the media and you realize how much they praise comfort and entertainment, you know, these are the values that you get. And you were talking about the young people, and we wonder why they are not involved. Well, if you look at what they get served on a plate on a daily basis by all the media, regardless that it's TV, radio, you know, printed, online, everything, there is a lot of comfort, a lot of entertainment, a lot of easy values, so to say. And then a crisis comes and all your values are challenged, because there is nothing comfortable in the crisis. You know, there is nothing predictable. There is no entertainment. There is no fun to be in the crisis. But what if the values that we would promote would be courage and responsibility? And when the crisis comes, you would feel the courage and the responsibility. Wouldn't you be more involved? Of course you would. Wouldn't the society be better? Of course it would. But we actually get what we have been cultivating so far. So that's why I said in the beginning, I truly hope that everybody, from the top down and the bottom up, or whatever we want to put it, everybody will learn something out of this, because we really need to rebuild the social consciousness, but in a healthy way. We need to revisit the values. We need to revisit the messages. We need to emphasize the need for people to take responsibility to respond to challenges at their level. You know, you don't have to end up working for UN to be kind to the people who need you, or to be more responsible towards the environment. This can be done at any level if we only care about, if we become aware. And this is another problem, that lots of people will probably care more about things if they become more aware. You can't change things that you don't know. If you don't know what your behavior is doing to the environment, you can't change that, because you don't know it's wrong. And it's the same on many, many levels. And that's where things like education come in. You know, we were talking about how our work is changed. I remember the messages in the beginning of the pandemic, which was like, we go to online school. And then, yes, the online school has been a joke, if you allow me to say, in many, many parts of the world. There are lots of children who did not have access to education because there are no devices, because there are no connections. There were CSOs who have done whatever they could during the pandemic to provide devices like tablets to the children in the vulnerable groups. But you know what? They live in places where there is no electricity, so they could not charge their devices. And this is the online education that we served to our children. So, I mean, it's really, really tough. There is something wrong with many of our systems. And if we fail to understand this at the highest decision level possible because of this pandemic, we will fail on our children. And that means we will fail on our future, because that's what the children are. And I'm not concerned only about the children, but I mean, it's just so, if you take the trouble to look to what is happening in this world, you tend to lose faith. And still CSOs have all those people who never lose faith. And they might not be strong in financial terms, but in terms of mission and dedication and loyalty to the people they serve, you can definitely find this in the civil society. These people don't give up. You know, we are ready to fight for democracy and for human rights. Even if there is a pandemic, we don't stop advocating. You know, we got messages of stay-at-home people to save lives. What about those people who don't have a house, who don't have a home? Wash your hands because it can save your life. How many people have access to water? So this pandemic has provided excellent advocacy opportunity for many causes that, as Aspasia was saying, we were trying for years to make them understand, and the pandemic just did it. You know, it was so simple. So at this point, I would say that our role as civil society organizations is definitely to make sure that they understand and they don't forget what has happened. So we have to open their eyes. We have to keep advocating, keep telling the same message over and over and over and over again, because this is why we came into being for. This is our mission, to speak for the people who don't have the voice. And that means to bring these messages, which are not comfortable, but they are needed. And this is, I would say, one of our biggest roles is to contribute to building this social consciousness. And I really hope to see a lot of dialogue between civil society organizations and other stakeholders, but it has to start from us. We have to talk among each other. We have to get together and crystallize our messages, make an action plan, and make sure that this momentum that the pandemic has created is not wasted. Because whatever the new normal will look like, I know there is a tendency of the systems to just go back to what they were. This is natural. We also as individuals do this in many times. You know, there is a temporary change, and then we just go back to our normal, to what we are used to. And we have a duty not to let them go to the old system. We have to stop this from happening. And I truly hope that every CSO will somehow find the strength and the resources, although everything is strained, and I definitely agree it's a really tough time. But we really need to find the resources and the strength to continue to promote these messages, because otherwise the new social consciousness will not be built as we would like to. And if we contribute, we will get what we contribute to.
Well, thank you very much, Cristina. As I was listening to you, I kept thinking to some of the nice American movies where there are these posters that says, you know, Uncle Joe wants you, join the army or whatever. Well, I'm ready to join your cause. I mean, you're very convincing about the message you want to put out. At some stage I said, tell me where to sign, I'm ready to go. So, Aspasia, let's hear what you have to say. Okay.
Okay. So to avoid repeating what Cristina already said, because I really agree with the way she puts things, I would like to share something. You know, Cristina, you mentioned that young people cannot change things if they are not aware of how things are. But there is another reason also. They won't change things if they believe that things cannot change. And I think that what we are facing is like a distrust or how can I say, young people are disappointed in institutions. They are disappointed even in CSOs. And I will share a point that the Ebola pandemic learned us. The best cure to a pandemic is accountability. So that's what emerged through the Ebola crisis, and we realized that it is important. CSOs also will have to be accountable if they want to keep accountable governments or other institutions. If decision makers need to be accountable, then we have to be accountable 100 times more. And for our case, it is more complicated, I think, because development organizations have to be accountable to their beneficiaries, first of all, but also to their partners, to the state, to the donors, to the supporters, to the staff. And unfortunately, governments are not always helping in this, towards this direction. I think that what we have been experiencing in Europe with this pandemic is something interesting, because on the one hand, we see a lot more of restrictions, like more an authoritarian Europe coming out of this pandemic. On the other hand, we see more civil rights groups emerging. And I think this is very interesting. In Greece, for example, our government has been really busy during the pandemic and the month following in presenting bills for the environment, for the civil society. And the last one, this week, they presented a bill to the parliament for the restriction of public gatherings, demonstrations and stuff, with the excuse, of course, of the traffic, which is actually not an excuse, but okay. The problem is that now the government can decide actually to whom they will give the permission to have a demonstration. And it's not only in Greece, unfortunately. We see Hungary, we see a lot of other examples in Europe. There is a shrinking of this political space that we used to have maybe, or we never had, and we need to advocate for. And I think, yeah, the civil society space is also shrinking, and we have to fight for this. In Greece, we see NGOs, the majority of NGOs are involved in the so-called refugee crisis, which of course is not a refugee crisis, it's a crisis of the system that creates the refugees, etc., etc. But there has been a very negative environment for the NGOs to work. And I think, actually, as Serdar was saying, NGOs and civil society organizations have contributed a lot to this so-called crisis. I used to work for Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, in 2014, where the first refugees were coming to the shores of the Greek islands, and there was nothing by the state. There was no provision, there was nothing, no plan for the reception and for the rights of these people. And actually for these years, all these years, many different organizations, both formal or non-formal, they have been offering a lot, and unfortunately this is not recognized. Concerning your question about how to change this consciousness, social consciousness, Dimitris, I think what we are trying to do is to both work with people on a personal level and on a collective level. Because what we have experienced is that sometimes poverty or vulnerability is considered like, is internalized by the people, by the vulnerable people themselves. They feel they can't do anything about it. They feel it's their fault, and they don't recognize it as a denial of a human right, actually, as an injustice that has to be fixed. So people need to get psychological support and support in general to feel that they can stand on their own feet and demand, and start demanding, start learning first their rights and then demanding their rights. And then you have to move to a collective level, because actually if just people try to react individually, we know for sure that nothing is going to change. So change requires both individual and collective action to happen.
Well, thank you very much. You know, you talk about the young people. I said this at the last webinar. I made the example of my son, who is 25 and is an angry young man, a young man that has had everything, privilege, good school and everything, and nevertheless feels betrayed by society, whether it's, you know, the fact that there's no job stability anymore, and whatever it is, and therefore does not trust the system, which is true. And as per your comment that you made about CSOs also need to be accountable. One of our participants, Stefanos, actually said maybe one of his comments is that maybe CSOs need to develop a code of conduct, which is an idea which might be something where this links into Christina's thing about need to talk to each other, CSOs, and maybe a code of conduct is something that CSOs should think about in these times as how to move forward. Serdar, you're smiling.
Yes, I'm smiling. Code of conduct is a good idea. That should be maybe talked in another time. For any organizations around the world, until today, the success was evaluated with profit. Like, NGO, I was always, my board is always evaluates the success and how many projects, some projects we get that year, and did we successfully implemented the project, and are we, our budget are equal or not. Universities, they're counting the students, how many students they have, and how much incomes that they're going to do. And media is after, profit. Private sector is definitely, and even governments. But from now on, I think, and then for this profit, last few decades, actually, the sectors were implementing or trying to be socially responsible and implementing corporate social responsibility projects to be more compatible in their country and in their international market. But for the future, the sectors will face new challenges, which these money profit will not be enough. The economic recession and the different social developments going to happen, I believe. So after COVID, success for the sectors will not be evaluated by profit, by cash. Because of this, the next generation leaders, business leaders or any academic leaders, any sectors, should be very careful for their success and for their sustainability. For the success and sustainability, they need to have, I believe they need to have a social aim. Money or profit should not be the aim. They need to have a purpose-driven strategy to convince the people who they serve for the good, for the people, with the social aim. As Cristina said, no need to work for UN to make good things or work for the good of the people. And when people convince with their social aim of the organizations, they will give social approval, which will bring the success for the sector organizations. Nowadays, when I meet with young people, I don't know which generation they are, but they are between 23, 27, they're always asking me that if I know any company who is working with a social aim, who is working on finding solutions for the problems of the world. The young generation doesn't want to work with big multinational billionaire companies. They don't that much have an ambition to make big monies and big titles. They're not after that. They don't want to work with these kind of big companies and make the boss richer and richer. I would like to give 3 examples of the sectors of new generations looking for jobs nowadays. For example, one young guy asked me that if I know any company working on poverty, hunger, health, education. Do you know any company working on gender equality? Do you know any company working with women problems and environment, clean energy, inequality, sustainability? Well, this is, very interesting, very surprising for me. And these are accounted as actually the Sustainable Development Goals. So it looks like that Sustainable Development Goals will be the new sectors for business, maybe. Companies working on these related areas will grab attention for young, successful, clever people to work with. And I think today's, if you look to today's biggest companies, around 50% of them are established last 25 years. And they're usually technology companies, as we all know. But I think from now on, next 25 years, end of next 25 years, if we look at the world's biggest company, I'm not saying richest, only biggest companies, will be the companies working on the issues, problems of the world, which I counted like poverty, hunger, gender issues, food security, environment, inequality. This is very good in a way, but for civil society organizations, it might be a danger because these areas issues of the world, civil society organizations, we were working with a social aim, with a non-profit aim, but now it looks like these young people, these social entrepreneurs, will come in these sectors and do this in a professional way, profit way, it doesn't matter, but not to become a billionaire and billionaire. For example, I know an NGO which is called Food Security Association, and they've actually noticed this change, and they established food security company. And now that company is doing unbelievable business. And I think that will be a very big company in the near future. Another company I know is working on development only. Their subject is development, regional development, any kind of development. And that company is actually growing faster than many other companies in Turkey, I know. So the subject areas that civil society organizations actually working on last, few tens of years are now the new business areas to invest. And lots of new social entrepreneurs will invest in these areas where civil society organizations are working. So civil society organizations should upgrade themselves and be more professional and find solutions to issues most professional way. Thank you, Dimitri.
Well, thank you, Serdar. I mean, I was going to ask you, because you said that, young people come to you and they ask you, they want to work in the private sector to make their living, but they want companies with a social impact. Is this really the trend, or they come to you because you work in the sector? Just like they come to me because we do some of the work. I mean, I wonder whether this is something, is a trend that's actually happening. Or is it because they know that Serdar Denler would know maybe some companies that have a social consciousness?
Actually, like you and me and our colleagues from Romania and Greece, yes, we are in the civil society sector, and we are working for the good, for the world and for the problems of the world. And young people knows that it is done by people like us. So that's why they're coming and asking us. But if we cannot satisfy these young people, they will going to go and establish their own company, not NGO, social entrepreneur in the sectors that they are interested in. So if this happens, and if we cannot be prepared and ready as a professional way, I mean, the areas, the subjects, the issues that we're working is slowly going to go to the social entrepreneurs, and they will do it in a very professional way. I'm not against that. I'm supporting this. I don't mind. Yes, go ahead. And then maybe that civil society organizations might find a new area to work on.
Okay, very, very interesting. I'm waiting to see, well, there's already a question here. Again, Stefanos, who's always very vocal, always, but good questions that he asks. So we'll go on for about 10, 15 minutes more. So if anyone has questions, please ask them. Let me try to read this first one for our panelists. Okay, it's a long one. Let me try to read it. Well, during this crisis, the governments dominated the narrative and the management of the narrative, and this makes perfect sense. Yet the success in managing the crisis can carry a major danger. Arrogance, for example, and therefore a kind of do-it-alone next step. And so here lies, according to Stefanos Valianatos, the emerging responsibility of the CSOs, but also of the states. Not to slip into a crisis, we need either a militarized approach or responsible behavior. And for this, a public campaign and monitoring the penalties are not enough. There should be a coordinated approach and a role for CSOs, which is something that I think all our speakers have talked about. Another domain I believe Aspasia touched upon is any human / political rights abuses in the name of what? So does anybody want to comment to this comment? Yes, Cristina, and mute.
Yes, yes, I want to comment a little bit on this. I have 2 points, and I was thinking which one I should start with. Or maybe I start from the end. That I was also mentioning the fact that we as CSOs will not give up fighting for democracy and human rights, and I have said this particularly because of this abuses. Because I'm just going to give an example from Romania. right. So to fight the pandemic, the government declared the emergency state, where the decision-making changes and the rules of public procurement get simplified, assuming that you would do public procurement for medical supplies and everything, not for any other issues that could wait. And at the same time, all the responsibilities of the public authorities to do the consultation in decision-making and to provide access to public interest information has been suspended. And I can't think of why couldn't you respond to requests of public interest information during the pandemic? I mean, in which way is this dialogue preventing you from fighting the crisis? Was this a necessary decision to suspend the access to public interest information? It was definitely not a necessary decision, but it was there. And like this, there were many, many little things which were adopted or suspended, you know, in the name of fighting the pandemic or preventing the spread of the virus, but they were not really necessary. I'm not advocating for irresponsibility here, but really some of the measures which were taken by some governments have not been necessary. And this links very much with the second point I want to make, which is related to relying on the responsibility or the militarized approach. I would definitely go for the responsibility. On the other hand, our states are currently getting what they have been giving to their citizens, and this is irresponsibility. Because you were talking, Dimitrios, about your angry son who had a good school and everything he needed, but that came from you as his parent, did not come from the government and from the society. The society has not been giving him what he wants to feel he lives in a fair and safe world. You know, he respects you for what you've given him, but he's angry with the society for how it is set up and for how people who don't have a parent like you have experienced in this society. So our governments are getting the citizens they deserve, as well as we as citizens get the governments we deserve. So I would say that we need to start from somewhere, you know, and we need to start building the responsibility. And the only way I see it happening is through individual commitment and through a lot of work of rebuilding confidence in our state institutions and rebuilding responsibility for the people. This is really a time-consuming effort. This is not going to happen tomorrow, only because there is a crisis. And it takes a lot of work and investment from the citizens to not try to, you know, overlook some of the rules, but also from the state. Build right rules for the people. Respect your own rules. Give the same rules for all the citizens. Because if you give responsibility and if you show responsibility and you give respect, you will get responsibility and respect. But if you as a state do not respect your citizens, you can't expect that they respect whatever decision that you're taking. We see it now. People, you know, are disobeying, and it's a risk for them individually, but it's really an expression of a protest. It's not about these times. It's about everything that has been gathering, you know, and people just don't have the patience anymore to invest respect in their governments. So the responsibility issue is really a crucial approach, but it has to come from everybody and also from the media. And we don't have time to touch on the media here, but I definitely say that they do play a huge role in all the disbalanced values and approaches that we see. And we really need to do something about how the information is spread and what kind of messages are given and how the people are influenced, and especially pay attention to the young people, because we can't afford to have an irresponsible next generation. We really need to cultivate their responsibility to themselves, to the state, to the other people. So this is really a huge effort, and it's it's the right time to do it. The pandemic has given us an incredible opportunity to reshape our society, and we should not fail to do this.
Very, very interesting. Someone else wants to add something?
I would, if
yeah, please.
there's no one else. I think I agree with Cristina again. And the thing is that I think the civil society sector has a share of responsibility in what is happening. And I would like to comment on Stefanos' earlier point about creating a code of conduct, developing a code of conduct, or self-regulation. Unfortunately, having worked in some of the Mediterranean countries, I'm seeing that the civil society organizations do not always take these opportunities and initiatives for self-regulation, for self-evaluation, for networking. I mean, if we are unable so far to mobilize youth, we are like hundreds of organizations in each of our countries, maybe thousands in the case of Turkey. And I never saw many civil society organizations getting together for a cause and bringing people out on the streets or doing something, you know, collectively. And I think this is one of our faults, and we have to admit it, and we have to work to make it better. And to comment on something that Serdar said before about the companies that are getting more social impact messages and orientation, I think I have noticed that the last year at least, there are a lot of advertising companies who are creating, like, let's say, TV ads using the language of the civil society organizations. So there are companies, profit companies, that now they speak our own language. They speak about diversity. They speak about Black Lives Matter even. I don't want to name anyone, but especially following the incidents in the US, there have been many companies, environmental friendly. How many companies now, they don't really advocate for to stop the climate change? So I think, yes, it's becoming, let's say our narrative is becoming sexier, and we have to take advantage of it. We have to be able to talk to the people ourselves. If profits can do it, we can do it better.
Okay, Serdar? I mean, I should, before you add, there's also a comment there by Rob Lewis, who, in reference to what you guys are saying, he says, I cannot see that respect or responsibility emerging from the US or the UK, where he's from. So it's also on a case-by-case basis. And I also, before I let you speak also, I was just thinking about, you know, my country, Aspasia's country, because she mentioned something before about, you know, the CSO sector in Greece being very much maligned. And it's so interesting because it's all linked into migration, refugees, which, because it's such a political issue, and because there are bad apples everywhere anyway, the whole sector is totally tainted. But that also stems from the fact that, I don't know about Romania, but I suspect, Cristina will tell us, but in the case of Greece, and in particular in Turkey, it's such a top-down sort of system, where civil society, so the bottom-up approach is very difficult for people to digest. In Turkey in particular, it's really a top-down system. In Greece, less so. We are more democratic and so on, other value, but still, it's very much like this. So any actor that comes in, non-state actor, that has a role to play and contribute, because the state cannot contribute, is maligned, because some of the things a non-state actor, a CSO, would do is hold government accountable. Right? Even by, you know, verbalizing the responsibility of government or the state or whatever, and therefore the whole sector is maligned. And in Greece, it's been a major struggle, I think, for that sector, especially when you deal with certain segments, you know, especially refugees, migration, and so on. That whole work that they've done is maligned, and this creates more complications in our work. Serdar.
Well, with the pandemic, when we were under quarantine, the first 2 weeks, actually, or 2-3 weeks, we were kind of in a shock and evaluating, you know, what is going to happen. But after, when we came over this shock, we started, what is going to be, how is it going to be after the pandemic process, how after COVID-19? And we started doing lots of Zoom meetings and trying to discuss. And what some groups said that civil society will get more powerful. Some groups said that governments will get more powerful. And the other stakeholders also, everybody said that, I mean, that they will be different groups that will have more powers. So this made some governments a little bit hesitating on these developments. So that's why they started dominating the civil society and putting more rules and new regulations. But as civil society, as I said before, we are kind of semi-closed. We don't have any right to do anything nowadays because of pandemic. And maybe you might heard that even for the next 3 weeks or something, the governor is forbidden to do any protest or any gathering in the city of Ankara because to protect the health of the people from the COVID. But actually it's not because of that. Because of that, there is some groups are against for some new laws. So to block that, they are using now the COVID and stopping everything with the excuse of COVID. So yeah, respect and responsibility is important. I think we have to learn that, and we have to be really careful after pandemic. And we have to, whatever we're doing, we really have to do properly. We don't have a chance anymore to make something wrong. In many cases, we don't have a chance because we don't have that much money anymore. We don't have that luxury. So we have to be careful on spending monies. I'm talking about the governments, NGOs, everybody. And also we don't have a luxury to lose people or supporters because it is not easy or it's not cheap as it was before. It will be expensive to regain those supporters. So from now on, I think whatever we're doing, we should do properly. That's all, Dimitri.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hear you all. I hear you all, and it's so interesting. One of the common themes is, even though they're varying degrees, some are more optimistic than others, that there's an opportunity which we have to seize, whether we can or not. Because there's what you're also saying is that there's also, it's a window of opportunity. We might revert back to our old ways as a society. So it's, what do we do to empower segments of our society to be involved in our work, and that's one thing. Also the fact that the CSO sector has to have a hard look at itself. So, you know, as the sector has been facing the challenges, the real challenges of staying alive, the organizations and so on, and doing its work, some issues have come to the fore. And so because if you want others to be accountable, you also need to, and therefore this is something that needs to be done. And one of the best ways of doing this, from what I gather from all of you, is really to start not only a dialogue with stakeholders, but also a dialogue within the sector proper. And that's, you know, what, going back to Aspasia was saying at the beginning, the local approach, which is something, as you were saying it, Serdar and I have been working and talking about for a long time in our initiatives, which is normal. So, you know, you do this locally, you do it regionally, you do it nationally, but also internationally in that sense. This has been very enriching. I keep taking very copious notes, and I need to start writing something based on everything that we have. We'll take one more comment, and then I will liberate all of you. Stefanos again. This man never stops. I don't know. I'm just kidding. So I have to recognize that the idea of a code of conduct is something that I realized as a result of discussing the performance of CSOs in Greece with Aspasia some years ago. In addition to the pressure that CSOs should put on the state to tighten up their own community's affairs in order to close the door to the rotten apples, hence stop discrediting NGOs at large. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Stefanos, we keep alluding to him. I'll give you the floor. I mean, it's interesting. Both Stefanos and I, we are IR people. We have an international relations background. But Stefanos, because one of the hats he's a national coordinator for Greece at the Anna Lindh network. He's evolved as an individual and has come to be involved in a lot of CSO work because he keeps the Greek network together and all that interacts with the network with the whole Euromed region. Just like myself, I'm an international relations professor that I've realized that I've gone through change and I need to connect with my students more, and then non-formal education becomes just as important as formal education, and my need as a citizen and as an individual to do more. So, so in that sense, I just want to say this about Stefano, but anyway, Cristina, yes.
Yes, I wanted to react on the topic of the code of conduct. I do agree that as CSOs, we need to self-regulate how we work as a sector, because sooner or later, if we don't do this, somebody will for us, and we might not like it. But related strictly to the code of conduct, I have to say that in certain countries, there are codes of conduct, maybe not necessarily for the entire sector, but they are field related. So I've been working for a long, long time in volunteer involving organizations. And there are countries who have codes of conduct for volunteer involving organizations. So there are various initiatives which exist. For instance, we in the children's rights and child protection side of the NGO sector, we do have child protection policies or safeguarding policies, which I know are not exactly the same as a code of conduct. But what I want to say is that different parts of various codes of conduct do exist there, but it takes a really organized effort to put all of this together and build a very simple but effective way of getting rid of the rotten apples. Because it's true, as in everything in this world, there are the rotten apples also in the CSO sector. And we also have to acknowledge that the other sectors are using and contributing to this. I mean, there are the so-called gongos, like the government, non-governmental organizations, which are controlled by governments in various ways and very subtle ways sometimes. You know, there are lots of businesses who establish foundations, who are managing money and who are doing things and getting involved in the policy making, but from the non-profit arm. So it's really a very, very complex issue that we are approaching, but this doesn't mean that we, I don't know how to say, the genuine CSOs, let's call them in this way, we should not invest the effort of building up codes of conduct which will at least help us differentiate from the rotten apples, so we don't get the entire sector tainted, as Dimitrios was saying, because there is an easy tendency to generalize everything. So if we really don't have the means and the mechanisms to separate the waters, then it becomes very difficult. And just one last point I want to make. Since you've given us the background of Stefanos, I suppose that people in his position could actually do something to stimulate this process.
Yes, I think Stefanos and I will be having a lot of discussions about this. Last point from Stefanos, indeed, he says, Ashoka with others is trying to do that in relations with the social entrepreneurship community. Yeah. And Ashoka has been very active. Okay, well, I think we could go on. We could talk among ourselves. I think it's a very interesting discussion, but I've also learned that webinars have to be kept a bit short. It's not like, even though we would like the physical contact, 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes is more, seems to be the norm. So I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. I've learned a lot. I've taken notes, as I said, and thinking already about what to do next. This is actually our last webinar of this series for the season. Serdar and I were talking whether we should have another one before the summer break, but we thought maybe we should stop here, and then come September, October, we'll start again this series of discussions. So Cristina, Aspasia, Serdar, thank you very much for contributing, for your interesting thoughts and your ideas. And I look forward to seeing you online, yes, but hopefully in the flesh sometime soon. Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you for organizing. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you.